beginning.
Hi, Diane.
Let us start. Hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Morning,
Hello.
everybody.
Hi.
Be
Hello.
welcome. We are.
Good.
Hello,
Wendy.
Athena. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Diane.
So,
Hi.
Athena.
Good morning.
Hi. Oh, hello, Paula. Good morning.
Chatjoulis.
Good morning.
You'll have Angeliki
Hi, Margaret.
Arvanitopoulou and Olga
Hi, Diane.
Nikolaidou from Greece, from the Hellenic Institute of Group and Living and Family Psychotherapy. They will make us think about communication and symbolization. Communication through and beyond language. The process of symbolization in the process of containment. So each of them will speak about 20 minutes each, and then we will have 30 minutes to discussion, a global discussion with everybody. About the chat, it will be open, but please just out of their communications, okay? You may write things, but you cannot, we must be unmute during their communications. And then you may unmute again, and about when the discussion is up to begin. So during their communications, please unmute yourselves. But the chat will be open. Perhaps the three presenters will have time to answer to some questions, but the others will stay. We are being recorded, so they are questions that make us think about. So they will be recorded, and the presenters will speak their answer if they can and they have time. Now we're beginning with Athena Marouda Chatjoulis, who is a professor of psychology, group analyst, psychologist, psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and I think I've said professor of psychology, and also a training member of the Hellenic Institute of Group Analytic and Family Psychotherapy. Please, Athena, you may begin.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to see you in this subplenary. I will share my screen, and you will be able to read what I'm talking. And so please tell me if something is not going well. So first to share my screen. Is that okay? Can you see?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So I will talk about communication through and beyond language. This is the plenary which is on. The process of symbolization in the process of containment. The present subplenary is the result of my work and the work of my colleagues in the areas of trauma, social trauma, and symbolic functioning, and how this can be connected with our work as group analysts. I would like to thank Dr. Sauer, who has accepted to be with us and convene this plenary. I will give my lecture first, stating my theoretical thoughts and arguments upon which our work is based. Then my colleagues, Angeliki and Olga, will present their work on the Homeric epic and the ancient myth of Athena, and the way these can be used in a psychoanalytic group setting. And I will begin. With our work, we would like to pose and think several questions. sorry, let me go down. Okay. In the middle of a pandemic, a social or a socioeconomical crisis, which creates traumatogenic environments and pathological potential spaces, how group analytic therapy can help? Is it possible for a society to contain the problems that may arise from a disaster and allow the emergence of good enough potential space when the society itself finds it difficult to provide promises and expectations? Is it possible for a society under the pressure of a chronic crisis to be self-observed and to create the necessary links and the understanding of the deeper meaning of the symbols for the benefit of its people as a good enough mother? These arguments, our main argument for this is that social traumata and traumatogenic environments, as in wars, pandemics, immigration, affect the individuals and groups' physical safety and their social security. As a result, a pathological environment, a pathological potential space is developed. In a pathological potential space, bonds are eroded. The process of symbolization is attacked. The individual, in order to survive, is in search of new symbolization and new narratives based on the traumatic experience. The individuals can only live and imagine themselves as victims within the crisis. This may lead to internal and external insoluble conflicts. Thus, in a pathological potential space, the individual feels trapped and can only see himself or imagine himself either as a victim or in war with himself or herself, or in war and conflict with other people. The above arguments are based on Winnicott's premise that cultural experience is an extension of potential space, a common pool of humanity into which individuals and groups of people may contribute, and from which we all, as he says, draw if we have somewhere to put what we find. Winnicott and the object relation theorists recognized that individuals extend their object seeking to their symbolic environment in order to feel connected and integrated. This idea that symbolic processes belong to the group or community bring to the foreground our work as group analysts. What happens then when the potential space becomes pathological, unable to permit symbolization? Winnicott refers to a cumulative trauma which follows a premature disruption of the mother's infant unity, or to a repeated impingement, a repeated failure of empathy from the mother on the infant needs. Ogden, elaborating on Winnicott's theory on the psychopathology of the symbolic functioning, suggests that the symbolic functioning is a direct consequence of the capacity to maintain psychological dialectics, and the psychopathology of symbolization is based on specific forms of failure to create, failure to maintain these dialectics. Like in the mother-child relationship, whenever society and its institutions fail to act as a container for individuals and groups, as for example, in the case of COVID-19 pandemic, in cases of war, immigration, social repression, economic crisis, genocide or persecution, a cumulative social trauma is constituted, which can result in a traumatogenic environment and a pathological potential space. In this pathological potential space, there is no negotiation between self and other. The symbol and the symbolized have been collapsed, and the macro holding environment is eroded. Eroded by social trauma, potential space loses flexibility, and instead of functioning as a space for creative problem solving, serves for splitting and projection. This failure of containment burdens the process of symbolization, where needs, according to Bion, can be recognized as wishes and senses can be transformed into thoughts and feelings. In addition, bonding, relations, and the sense of belonging are disturbed. As Erickson says, I continue to exist, though damaged, and maybe even permanently changed. You continue to exist, though distant and hard to relate to, but we no longer exist as a connected pair or as linked cells in a larger communal body. Supported by the new constructed narrative, a we-they splitting occurs, and negative or unwanted attributes and blames is projected onto the other. Truth or the concern for the other cannot be demonstrated, since the other is leading to dehumanization and possible aggressive or violent behavior. A vivid elaboration of the above thoughts and arguments will be presented by my colleagues on how we could restore our symbolization process with the use of myths and symbols. I will give a small example from a small analytic group conducted in Greece during the period of the socio-economical crisis. In the small analytic group, during the crisis, there was a continuous effort to preserve the social symbols that make up the potential space of each individual and of the group as a whole. The members of the group were in a constant effort to cope, almost to fight to survive within the crisis. They have stopped using their old symbols, which helped them in their everyday life. By survival, they were referring to the effort to maintain a continuation of a way of life in which they were used to. It was like there was a continuous battle to preserve the achievements and maintain the hope that the crisis would finish and life could continue as before. Only a miracle could lead to a creative change. Could members within the small group create a potential space which could not only contain their anxieties, but also help them to make new civilizations of life, different from the past, attuned to the present, but still good enough to live? At the beginning, in the small group, there was a conflict between the members that resonated with the social crisis. People were aggressive to each other. It was difficult for the members to enter truth and develop the capacity to concern for the other. Members were bringing in the sessions a collective anxiety associated with separation panic, of being dropped by society's holding institutions. This condition seemed to promote regression to more and more primitive defenses, splitting and projection. Agni, in a group said, "It's not so simple, and I'm pushing myself a lot. I want to know how long this thing will last. I do not feel well. And I'm saying to myself, I put a limit even to my participation in this group. By the end of June or until July, I will stop and I will do it. If you could tell me how long I should go on to get better, then I would think otherwise." Last week, Maria in the group told me that I stand with my feet in two bowls. The one holds the most adult part of me, but this is my past. The other one, the more juvenile. And you keep telling me that I have to choose what I want to be, because these bowls are drifting slowly away, and I will sing. Yorgos. In the beginning of the session, I was eager to talk about myself, about some issues that concern me. Now nobody seems to be able to understand me. Now I'm feeling that I didn't have the time or the space to talk, or as the needs of the others are more important than mine. It seems that parasitic links and parasitic type of communication appeared in the group. The group as a whole became a hostile environment, and the containing process a destructive one. Relating, thinking, and containing were attacked. As a result, the individuals were either becoming narcissistic and not sufficiently interpersonal, or wounded, as well as regressive and aggressive, of not being able to depend on each other, or to be acknowledged and contained. They became destructive to themselves and to the small analytic group, or to the social groups in which they belong. How group analytic therapy can help? In a small analytic group, in the middle of a crisis, can we address the inner world without also training the therapeutic lens on the outer? Can the inner and the outer stand alone without the therapist becoming more attuned to the real? The challenge then becomes how to integrate those external events in the inner processes of the unconscious of the group as a whole, in order to permit the symbolic functioning to be restored. It is suggested that probably the demand from an analytic group therapy is not so much the creation of a non-pathological potential space, but somehow the restoration of the member social symbols or social thoughts, of their social insight in reference to their present traumatic reality. If this fails to function, we may result in relationships which lack hope or optimism for any change, as well as in targetless, homeless groups, and in societies that revolve around themselves in constant quest for their tail. Thank you.
Thank you, Athena,
Yes.
for your very clear and optimistic perspective of the use of analysis and group analytic psychotherapy groups to overcome difficult moments. Thank you. So now we are going to listen to Angeliki Arvanitopoulou, who is a psychologist and trainee of the Hellenic Institute of Group Analytic and Family Psychotherapy. So please, Angeliki.
Thank you, Isora. Hello, everybody. My title is about the heroic code of Kleos in Homeric Iliad, as a therapeutic means of relational development and inclusion. So this discussion is about how language helps inclusion in groups. However, it is not about the usual modern group or about the modern language. Instead, this discussion risks to say that by reading the Homeric Iliad, one has some therapeutic effects very similar to those we enjoy in group analysis. In fact, by reading the poem, you enter a mental, fantasized therapeutic group, the group of the ancient Achaeans, the time they were at war with the Trojans. This very inclusion is due to some very special qualities we find in the language of Iliad, and this prepares the soil for the therapeutic processes to start growing. Now, the special qualities of the language in the Iliad are around the heroic code of Kleos, which is the narrative principle of the poem. So what is Kleos? Kleos is the glory of the hero which is shared. Please pay attention here that the glory has to be heard. At the same time, bear also in mind that Kleos is the poem that includes the glory which is shared. This reminds us of group therapy, where the group is both a setting for the therapy to take place and the content of the therapy itself. Now, as a message, Kleos presupposes a certain kind of devotion to the honor code of Homeric heroes. Okay, then, the hero is supposed to be exceptional in virtue and honor, which means to be exceptional in strength, courage, bravery. Because for the heroic cult, if someone had these characteristics, he was sure to win in battle and be glorified forever. Kleos is unwilting glory, after all. It is glory that lives forever. And why is that the glory of the hero lives forever? It is because the future reader is going to find him forever in the Iliad. Time is unlimited and the hero is ever available. So the hero has to be risky, has to be extreme, but as the ultimate prize ever given to a man, he has Kleos, he has eternal glory. And let's see how Kleos is relational as a medium. Kleos as a heroic code of glory is relational by its own right, since it requires others to be actively present, to be participants glorifying the hero. This is as we say that the meaning of Kleos necessitates group inclusion. We are to find the modern reader of the Iliad in a continuum with the previous readers that start the following day Homer wrote the poem, and it is going to be continued forever. In a sense, we become part of the constant flow of Kleos. So let's see how the reading experience provides a group context. Kleos, as I said, is the glory for the hero, and it cannot exist outside the poem. Kleos is indispensable with words, and this means that no matter how excellent is the hero in battle, he cannot have his glorious read outside the poem. And this is a huge benefit because the reader as a participant does not find him as at a disadvantage because he is not contemporary to the Homeric heroes and he lives in a less significant era. And this is because both the reader and the Achaeans and Achilles, if you like, share the common things, share the common uniqueness, the commonality that both have their experience that holds true only as far as one is within the lines of the poem. Therefore, the therapeutic setting is the Iliad. As we have said above, the poem becomes a symbolic meeting place where the world of the hero meets your own world. You identify with the hero. You're also framed by the poem like him, and thus you are secure enough among your heroic comrades, the Achaeans, to fight your own psychic Trojans. The same way Achilles is in battle, you're also in the inner battlefield. And as Bion says, the analytical field is a construct where an emotional storm arises. And I find the stormy analytic field to be very similar to the battlefield of Troy, which is also tempestuous in emotions. But why is the Iliad more therapeutic than any other text of good literature then? It is in the language that the difference lies. The Homeric language is elevated. It lies in exaggeration. It's pregnant with explosive dynamism. For this reason, it's very inviting of an emotional participation and allows unconscious material from the reader's important relationships come into play. It opens a door, a kind of semi-permeable membrane between the reader and the Iliad. To use a term from Bion, if there is a contact barrier between the unconscious and conscious, a barrier between the world of Iliad as a symbol of the unconscious and the conscious thinking part of the reader, then the heroic language of Kleos forces the lever of this barrier open, allowing these two worlds to interact. So the contact barrier opens, and this way it allows the reader's esoteric sphere to be populated by the heroes of the Iliad. This very moment, some therapeutic processes and inner changes start through symbolization and identification. And to the lofty and forceful quality of language as a kind of emotional starter of these changes, let's add the power of the wide thematic scope of human experience we find in the epic. So wide is the thematic repertoire that the modern Achaean, the modern reader, can find a very rich list with choices to represent internal psychic material. And as Freud has shown, repressed memories and their repressed psychic energy can be re-evoked and transmitted in an image or in a scene or in a metaphor, which will be a point of invested libido. Here to have a good example, let's take the scene with Agamemnon. Agamemnon was the chief general of the Achaeans, and he takes the girl, Briseis, from Achilles. It was a habit then, when you go to war, you take everything, women included. He takes Briseis from Achilles away to have her his own, which could very well be invoking of a similar loss or fear of loss one has endured by someone stronger in rank or age and has since then been repressed. So it is the explosiveness, it is the thematic scope, and last, the metaphors. The metaphors as initiators of endopsychic processes. The metaphors Homer uses to depict Kleos all belong to glory. And to use my own metaphor now, as Homer in his metaphors likens different elements, the reader is in a similar process of building metaphors. He uses fantasy, emotion to create his own metaphors or to substitute one part of the metaphor with something more intimate to him. In a way, the reader is influenced to energetically start building the bridges between these two worlds, the hero and his own. He starts the network. He takes the Homeric metaphors as material and he creates his individual part. He fills in the space and meets the links between him and the hero, between different kinds of mental states within him, within the sphere of the poem and in relation to his own personal Iliad. Definitely, there is a process of relating, of traversing caesuras, to use a bionic term again. This process of traversing caesuras, of making bridges, gives birth to new mental structures which are created during the process of linking of connections. The metaphors of Kleos help the reader to reintroduce or review how he relates things, to pair known things in different ways, to reconsider psychic elements, and this may help in turn to metabolize and digest the experiential material, to process, to reframe. And but which is the framing theme, is the proper metaphor because it is the right territory for these bridges to be built. And Bion has said that traversing a caesura necessitates withholding a catastrophic upheaval with one's world that results in a reordering of emotional structure. So let's go now to the therapeutic aspects of Kleos, but before talking about this, just consider that because everything in the story of Troy has to do with battle, desire, love, with extremities, the conflictual aspects of relationships and internalized objects are facilitated to be symbolically represented. And we go on to identification and introjection, since they facilitate the maturational process of the reader. So the heroes are larger than life, the same way our internalized objects, our parents once had been. And being there incessantly in the poem, the heroes lend themselves to become internal objects, to motivate us in laying new mental structures, new internal structures. It can be that either the heroes as introjected objects pair with our parental objects, and there they remedy probable deficiencies, or that they become quite new separate structures that sit next to our pre-existing parental introjected objects. And in the second case, this introjection is safe due to some kind of distance that exists between the object, the hero, and the subject, the reader, whereas parents in the interlude of life were introjected before, one could have a say, before one could have an objection. Now we have the prim of a more conscious decision of the hero's internalization. So whichever option you take, the point is that the internalized heroes are heavily invested with libido. Whatever the hero does in battle is first symbolized and then travels away from Troy, only to bring relevant changes in the internal Troy of the reader who identifies with him. And because most problems in our maturational development happen as we are forced to split between an idealized, emotional available good object and a rejecting emotional unavailable bad object. Here, the hero, the way the hero moves around the poem helps you to integrate some desired and undesired qualities of the internal object into a more integrated one. And take Achilles, for example, the best of the Achaeans, the hero of the heroes. If you give him a deep glance, you will not find the typical sample of perfect, of unblemished, idealizable model. Far from it. Your pupils are expected to dilate in many cases as you trace him in the poem. However, as the reader finds Achilles going from the very degraded levels of human behavior to the heights of nobility, of everlasting glory, he has a very good available figure to identify with. This is because Achilles symbolically contains both idealized and unwanted parts of oneself, both love and hate, and therefore he is a proper internal object, be there forever, be there to contain and incorporate more inclusively various parts of your inner psychic world. And once a reader identifies with Achilles, he has to tolerate the way the hero disappoints him. He has to maintain the alliance with him. In instances, he behaves as a beast and not as a man. The good thing is that by tolerating him, the reader may also try to tolerate those parts of himself that may be cut off from his idealized self. This way, the reader has to tolerate the humane condition that the most degraded parts of himself could well coexist with the nobler ones. And this is not always a bloody conflict or one that requires millions of charioteers for defensive action, but perhaps a more affordable reconciliation. The reader may finally come to contain it. And talking about containment, I want to talk about containment through frustration because, as we will see, frustration and loss are the primary constituents of Kleos, a presupposition of the maturational process of changing and of transcending. And in the story, the alternates of disappointment and triumph are not just frequent, but they are also stretched in epic dimensions. The reader has to tolerate the pain and loss. However, here the pain and loss is not just a battering experience as we know it in modern life. This is because even the most painful loss can be found to be quietly next to the quarters of joy and feast, the same way death often has just a thin partition to separate it from the vitality of bravery, from the fully fledged sense of erotic love and other acts that are pregnant with life. And because Achilles is too busy with the matters of warfare, the reader, a less troubled version of him, but still a fighter, is free to roam between the lines of the poem and turn the disappointment and loss into tolerance and capacity of containment. Last, I want to talk about transcendence because Kleos is all about transcendence. The hero is not imperishable in the record unless he goes beyond his limits, both physical limitations, but mostly beyond his narcissistic walls of pride. In no way it is the mature thinking that culminates to Kleos. It is rather the decision to face pain rather than divert and resort to more easy solutions like the one of Nostos, of homecoming Achilles could have taken. As Bion says, the crucial determinant in mental growth is whether the individual decides to evade frustration or tolerate it. As we previously said, Kleos is very much about transcendence, but it is a kind of relational transcendence. I say so not only because Kleos means being glorified by others, but mostly because the hero has to find the courage to be more of a member of the group rather than an individual person. In essence, a man is asked to fulfill a transition from a narcissistic schizoid paranoid thesis to a more depressive one. And in one scene, we find Achilles in seclusion and anger due to a quarrel with Agamemnon. He denies to fight, and this leads to catastrophe. There is even a plague, a kind of ancient COVID, that crashes down the Achaeans. But in a few Homeric shots further away, we find him fighting in pain for the death of his best friend Patroclus. So relational concern fights against the egotistical one, and the first wins, even though this win also means the hero's death, and he knows that he's going to die. It was predetermined by gods that Achilles had just two choices, either to return to his place and have a rich, luxurious life, or to die young and live forever in the Iliad, having Kleos, having eternal glory. It is not seeking his own death per se, but it is transcending the previous, more narcissistic and immature perspective of life that makes a hero. It is being in a constant flow of change towards serving others more than your own pride, of not settling down to the saturated comfort zone of static narcissism that creates Kleos. It is not that you are born a hero. It is that from being one who wants to eat the flesh of your enemy, you become one who is moved by the disaster you inflict to this same enemy. You become one who respects his enemies, one who is moved as you find Priam pleading with you for a son you killed. This is what writes your record in the Iliad. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Angeliki. Now we are going for, it's very important, your communication about the importance of literature, metaphors, and myths in the understanding of human beings and understanding and the development of human beings, besides their nationality or their political choices. Now we are going to listen to Olga Nikolaidou, who is an actress and also a trainee of the Hellenic Institute of Group Analytic and Family Psychotherapy. So please, welcome, Olga. You may begin. Olga?
Sorry. Hello to everyone. Thank you to be here with us, for being here with us. The title of my presentation is The Symbolic Language of Myths as a Tool of Assimilation and Inclusion. And actually what I want is to share an experience I had a few years ago. So it's the case of a group of refugees and immigrants learning Greek through the myth of Antigone. Myths are the dreams of mankind, and their origins are lost in the mists of time. It could be said that they are the oniric remains of the history of its childhood, which they reflect. The fact that myth is inextricably linked to the region of the unconscious and is therefore a tool of the psychotherapeutic process is proven by what else? By a myth. It is one of the first myths in which Zeus, or Dias, the father of gods and mortals, seeks a way to give birth to the world, cosmogony, and finds it when he follows the advice to Nyx, to night, to swallow her son, primeval Phanes, born from the cosmic egg and visible only to his mother until then. According to the Orphics, Phanes is Eros in his most primordial and primitive dimension. Thus, by swallowing, namely assimilating and incorporating the unconscious and uncontrollable sexual drive, Zeus manages to become the master of himself and of the universe. In other words, Zeus, and let me clarify something here, the father of gods and mortals has two names, Zeus and Dias, which in Greek language has two totally different meanings. Dias means the one who separates things, while Zeus means the one who unites things. So in this case, Zeus, acting as Zeus, as the one who unites, manages to merge the light of the conscious and the darkness of the unconscious in a common place inside him and have them converse in a common language, the symbolic language. I remember the first time I went to the Sunday school of immigrants. Let me note that the Sunday school of immigrants is a Greek structure, a movement which is about 15 years old and has nothing to do with government entities. It is based exclusively on volunteer help and accepts immigrants and refugees with no prerequisites. So I went to the school on a Sunday because immigrants had to work or try to find the work on the other day, on the other days of the week. For them, there was only a Sunday for trying to learn the language of the country where they had ended up by necessity and not by choice. People persecuted, scared by horrible experiences such as wars, torture, or shipwrecks that they managed to survive, people who had been at best uprooted and had fled abroad seeking not a better future, but just a future. People who had found themselves in a new, unfamiliar environment into which, however, they longed to integrate, realizing that language was the safest vehicle, the best way to achieve this assimilation. I remember the initial fear I felt when I realized how old the building was. The rooms were so dirty, so small, and there were so many students. But I also remember that then I started noticing the colorful posters decorating the grumbling walls with slogans such as "Deport racism," "There are no illegal people in any language," and we all know the language of solidarity, let's start speaking it. And of course, I remember the language of the eyes and of the face, which with no sound at all spoke 1,000 words per minute. There were so many smiles, so many touches, handshakes of trust without the use of antiseptic, as COVID-19 had not entered our lives yet, and tears of gratitude among the people who formed that human canvas, a canvas pulsing with life that first day at the beginning of a totally different school year that started certainly not coincidentally on September 21st, the day that UNO, United Nations Organization, has established as International Peace Day since 1981. We people need to act symbolically at every opportunity. We need to cut the real, which is not finite and therefore frightening, according to Lacan, since we, as finite beings, cannot possibly conceive it. So we need to cut the real as if we were cutting a slice of bread with which we try to satisfy our hunger for meaning and importance in whatever we do. To return to the aforementioned myth about the beginning of the world, the action of Zeus, namely the integration of a part of the frightening unconscious, constitutes the creation of an internal passage, an interior bridge that enables the id and the ego to communicate, as Carl Jung has mentioned. The myth, as a narrative beyond the obvious and what is said by the words, expresses an impossible desire to speak the unspeakable, to name the unnameable, to give shape to the shapeless parts of the unconscious. Shakespeare says that the aim of art is to give life a shape. The form of art, the body in which myth abides, is tragedy. To put it differently, myth is the soul of tragedy. The concept of tragic is the ability of man to accept inside him the monstrous, the id, that which is bigger than himself and beyond his understanding. To return to Lacan, when he first articulated his proposal about the unconscious structured as a language, he understood the unconscious chain of spoken words according to the language categories of metaphor and metonymy, replacing the respective terms of Freud, condensation, and displacement in the interpretation of dreams. I once asked my students at the School of Immigrants to tell me how they understood the meaning of metaphor in language. Do you know what one of them, Ahmed, a young Syrian, answered me? It is when a word wants to be transferred somewhere else, and it sets off to go further, and it travels and grows, and in its boat there is room for other words, as well apart from itself. Isn't it amazing? He answered the question about what a metaphor is by creating a new metaphor of his own. Ahmed naturally expressed the need and the possibility not only to describe in a poetic and lively way what we saw as something much more than a mere grammar phenomenon, but unconsciously also to bring his own personal experience, a frightful boat trip in the Mediterranean, to the home of the new language. The group that I eventually undertook to teach and actually taught for 3 years at the School of Immigrants was an advanced one, which means that all the students were already able to various degrees to communicate in Greek, even on a basic level. The class consisted of 3 young men from Syria, Ahmed, I have already mentioned him, 18 years old, Hamoudi, 22 years old, and Shiar, 25 years old. Kerem, a 30-year-old man from Kurdish descent, 2 young women, Tanya from Russia, 22 years old, and Shuang from China, and Marina, a 50-year-old Bulgarian woman, 7 persons totally. In the 3rd year at the School of Immigrants, we decided to continue the lessons of Greek through learning the myth of Antigone, as we know it, through the popular tragedy of Sophocles. The story of the specific myth is generally known. I'm just repeating it. 2 brothers, Eteocles and Polynikes, kill each other when the former refuses to surrender the power to the latter, who invades then in his hometown, Thebes, as an enemy. After the tragic outcome of the conflict, Creon, the uncle of the 2 dead brothers, ascends to the throne of Thebes. King Creon decrees that the brother who defended the city is to be buried as a hero, whereas the one who attacked it deserves a traitor's fate and is to remain unburied and unmourned, unlamented. Antigone, one of the 2 sisters of Eteocles and Polynikes, the other one is Ismene, defies the king's order at the expense of her own life. A lot has been said about the effect of this tragedy on the world literature and thought, as well as about its psychoanalytic and existential depth. Besides the fact alone that Antigone keeps reappearing, either as another interpretation of the classical tragedy or adapted to contemporary life, like French Anouilh or German Brecht's Antigone, proves its timelessness. From my side, I try to describe briefly the stimuli and the dynamics developed among the group of this class due to this particular myth. When I first talked to the students about Antigone, I told them as an introduction that this is a tragedy with 2 fundamental concepts, the concept of state, law, and that of the bands of affection come into conflict through the characters of Creon and Antigone, respectively. It is a timeless conflict, of course, laws and state and institutions, law of the father, against the loved ones, blood bonds, family, and relationships. As Antigone says, unwritten laws prevail over written decrees, since they belong neither to today nor to tomorrow, but live forever. Nobody knows when or where they appeared. It is a statement that refers to the unshaped and therefore achronous unconscious. It must be understood that the thought of not burying her brother was inconceivable to Antigone. Not keeping the relationship with the dead signaled a death in itself for the living in a culture where the world of the living could not be possibly cut off from that of the dead. Freud, in his book Totem and Taboo, refers meticulously on that. In the group, and while the mythical figure of Antigone had probably started functioning, according to Jung, either as a psychologism or as an archetypal psychic structure of extreme antiquity, some people found the courage to speak about the burden they bore inside them, having had to leave their own people unburied in the middle of the sea, unburied in the middle of the sea. So we can probably say that it was then when, due to the climate of trust that has been established, the members of the group felt secure enough to start narrating stories of their lives and sharing deeper experiences. Ahmed, however, was the one to put a crucial question. Is it worth giving your life for someone who is already dead? there are certainly many different psychoanalytical type answers to Ahmed's question. One could say, for instance, that the process of mourning itself, namely the reaction to the loss of a loved object, is also carried out through the burial ritual, which may be symbolically read as return to the womb of the great mother, the earth. Therefore, forbidding the ritual may be understood as forbidding the mourning. According to Freud, then, when Antigone forcefully claims the right to mourn, her act is interpreted not as a pathological condition, but as a vital decision. In this sense, we can say that Antigone's decision to die is a life decision. She claims the right not to melancholy, namely the introjection of the lost object into the ego, but the right to mourn. Antigone does not intend to identify with the lost object. In fact, Weisman believes that her unconscious desire is not to be separated, but to unite all the members of her family through death, since this was not possible to do it through life. Returning to the text of Sophocles, one day we read the following excerpt. Anyone who disobeys Creon's decree will be stoned to death in a public square. Since stoning is a practice that unfortunately still exists in some Muslim countries, the mere mention of it upset the members of the group, especially the Muslim ones. Shiar, the young man from Syria, felt the need to share with us the fact that he had attended the stoning of an adulteress. Shiar told us that he never saw that woman's face, and the only thing he remembered was a body wrapped in clothes covered in dirt and blood, which jolted every time it was hit by a stone until it eventually remained still. During that lesson, Tanya, the young woman from Russia, said something that showed the extent to which the meaning of the symbolic dimension had been assimilated by the group. Her words were, "We have never witnessed a stoning, but we too have been hit by stones and thrown our own." However, all members of the group would like to act like Antigone at the crucial moment, even if they had to be stoned after that. Only Ahmed, once again, reacted differently. "I wouldn't act as Antigone, as much as I'd like to do it, because my desire to live is even stronger. I would understand Antigone if she gave her life to save another life." Few lessons later, we read in the group probably the most emblematic quote from Sophocles' tragedy. When Creon tries to convince Antigone that her hero brother and her traitor brother cannot be possibly buried with the same honors because the latter is a foe who will never be a friend even if he dies, Antigone answers, "I was not born to hate, but to love." These words made a great impression on the whole class. They brought about an emotional outbreak and caused a simultaneous common reaction. Everybody wrote them down immediately in their notebooks and then asked me to write them on the blackboard to make sure that they had got them right. There was an almost ritual silence for a few minutes. Then Ahmed suddenly said, "Could you please write the words exactly as they were spoken by Antigone?" At first I didn't understand what he meant. We naturally read the text of Antigone translated and not in ancient Greek, which is a dead language and would have no practical use, let alone for immigrants. I was so taken aback by Ahmed's request that I resorted to rational arguments in my attempt to refuse, explaining to him, for instance, that nobody would understand him if he said these words in ancient Greek. Ahmed's answer to the argument, "Nobody will understand you," left me speechless. He said, "It doesn't matter. What it matters is that we learn these words exactly as Antigone spoke them." His request was endorsed by the whole group, so I wrote on the blackboard the phrase in ancient Greek. Each and every one of them tried to learn this sentence by heart, seeking who knows what in its sound. Did they long to hear Antigone's voice reverberate inside them? Inspired by Antigone's words, and inspired by the reaction of the students, of the members, to Antigone's words, I asked from the members to bring to the next lesson some verses from a poem or song in their own language, speaking of love. And we did a sort of a little experiment. We abandoned ourselves to the sound of the words to find out what feelings can be caused by untranslated language that we don't speak, and what it can make us imagine that these words mean, and what another person, a member of our team, can tell us with words, but also beyond them. It was incredible, but almost all of us understood what we normally wouldn't be able to understand. Yes, we did know that the central theme was love, but we managed, for instance, to distinguish whether what we heard had to do with maternal love, fiancé's love, or the love of one's country. We were able, even momentarily, to speak many different languages because we had managed to make a code of our group language, of our own language, a language related to our group and what happened within it. Before I end, I would like to describe you another important incident that took place at the Sunday School of Immigrants. One day, Swan, the young girl from China, asked Ahmed, probably in order to tease or provoke him a little, "Do you still dislike Antigone?" Ahmed felt almost insulted. Dislike her? Me? I even dreamt of her. Indeed, that day he talked to us about a dream he had had. He had seen a young woman dressed in white like a bride. He couldn't see her face, but he knew she was Antigone. However, as he was getting closer, her veil changed in color and size, becoming something like a red road. Dream myth, a symbolic language, a language which, in the effort to penetrate the invisibility of desire and make its symbol visible, eventually loses it, like a baby who loses the maternal breast and keeps searching for it on the dream screen. After all, who can escape that which never sleeps? Last but not least, I would like to tell you what has become of my students, of the members of our newly psychodynamically group. Shiar, the Syrian man who shared with us the stoning experience, left Greece 2 years later and went to Sweden. He lives and works there now. He has made a family, speaks Swedish fluently, and recently got Swedish citizenship. I find out about him through Facebook. Hamoudi, the other Syrian, followed a similar course, ending up in the Netherlands. Tanya, the young woman from Russia, married a Greek. They have their own business, a coffee bar, and she recently obtained an English language certificate. Marina, the middle-aged woman from Bulgaria, keeps working as a housemaid in Greece, as she did when she first attended the School of Immigrants. Now, however, she has time to go to a dance school and take lessons of Latin dances, which had been her dream since then. Shuang returned to China, and we have not heard from her. I don't know what has become of the Kurd Kerem either. As to Ahmed came to say goodbye shortly before the end of the third school year. He told us that he had decided to return to his country, Syria, to perform his military service. "I'll see you again. I'll come back soon," were his last words. We never saw him again, though. He didn't come back and never will. He was killed at the age of 21 in a civil war when a senior officer, a Creon, ordered him to open fire on a crowd of civilians gathered at the square to demonstrate against the Assad regime. Ahmed refused to carry out this order and was executed on the spot, along with all the other soldiers who followed his example. I still wonder today whether at the moment of crucial decision he remembered Antigone's words. Uti synechtin, ala symphilin effin, meaning I was not born to join in hating, but in loving. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Olga, to give us one more testimony of the legacy of Greek culture to humanity. And I also would like to highlight the importance you gave to us to the results of your work in the last part of your communication. So now we can discuss until 1 p.m. 2 p.m. Barcelona hour. So now you must unmute your micros and let us begin the discussion.
I would like to say something. I would like to say how I appreciate.
Nina, sorry.
Athena, yes. I would like to say how I appreciate the work of Olga and Angeliki, because we're working together on this symbolic functioning, and I'm really proud of their work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Unmute yourself so that we participate more spontaneously.
I feel as if I've been given some really fantastically rich material, and I feel as if I'm going to need a long time to digest it all and for it to sort of enter into me. But at the moment, I'm just feeling very moved, I must say.
It's a wonderful way of using the word as an object. It came across in all of your detailed discussions and so rich. I think it was really one of the best talks I've heard on this topic. I am in awe of the Greek psychological society that allows you to use this use of metaphor and literature in this way. It's just so rich. You know, coming from a culture where basically CBT is the Bible of so many psychologists, it's just wonderful to hear all of these discussions. I thank you. It's terrific. Antigone in particular, all of these stories are so rich in analytical meaning and so relevant for today. And I was just wondering, in the first one, this use of COVID and bringing it to our present day reality in the pathological space, and the type of implications it has in everyday practice. I wondered if anybody can relate that to perhaps their own clinical work, how they've worked with that. Yes.
Well, if I can say some thoughts, thank you very much for the kind speech. I would like to stay to that you say about the language, which give us some very rich information about the way we are expressing, we are trying to expressing. In Greek language, for example, aschimo, meaning ugly, is literally what has no shape. Because you remember I said that Shakespeare said that the aim of art is to give shape to life. And for all of us, the difficulty is to deal with something unshaped. So it's probably interesting that in Greek language, the word aschimo means the one that has no shape, and everything that has shape is ugly. And omorpho, namely beautiful, is what has a form, what we manage to give a form to. Just for, because you tell about the language. But I suppose that in all languages, through etymology, we can find some, you know, mystical paths, even in English language, even in Spanish language, in all languages, that's for sure.
But you even used a more elaborated form. You used the form of myth to give access to the migrants.
Yeah.
And I think this concept is quite brilliant. I mean, your presentation as well, but only to hear the concept and reading the abstract, I thought, yes, that's that's a good thing to do. I did maybe in a way a similar project in Colombia with migrants there. I'm an analyst, group analyst, but also an architect. So they were all farmers, and they would never go in psychotherapy because they say, I'm not mad, I'm not ill, I will not do so. So the access was to try to design a building with them, but through workshops, also working through their traumas and their lost homes and so on. So this way, I could reach them, or we could reach them, and yeah, I was reminded of that project as well, because it's like using a vehicle to get access, or to facilitate access where some people don't have normally access to it, and you are even closer to language and to bring the unconscious into consciousness, but I think the ways of accessing are quite similar.
I really appreciated the three presentations, and yeah, they were very vivid for me, and I was very interested, particularly the last one, that of Olga. I felt it was powerful, and I thank you because I appreciated all of them. I was thinking of something maybe to clarify. Olga, you mentioned in the beginning that it was a school for immigrants, and that was the school for immigrants to learn Greek. But then, if I heard it correctly, at the end you said, in my group analytic work. So how is there a switch? Was it the same group that you taught Greek and then you switched to a group analytic experience, or how was that?
Okay, yes, thank you for that question, because yes, I have to clarify that this was not a psychotherapeutic group. This was a class.
Okay.
And during the third year, as I said, when I realized that there has been established a climate of trust, when we start talking about Antigone, I found out that this helped people to unfolding, you know, their experiences in another way, in a deeper way, I mean, and metabolizing maybe some traumatic experiences, because those people had many traumatic experiences, all of them. Some of them most, but all of them, they have that. So in fact, it was not a strictly psychotherapy group, and I'm not a psychotherapist. I have also to admit that, to be honest with you, I'm a student I'm not yet. I hope one day maybe I could become as you all, but at the moment I'm not yet that. But I found out by going to this experience that we can talk in a psychoanalytical way for all this experience. That's why I try to share this experience with you, and I hope you find that connection.
Yes.
I hope you can.
Yes.
Of course, you know much more from me, but in this field. But I hope that you can find that connection.
I'm Olga. I'm a trainee myself, so I think we are at the same boat. But I was very curious because since you started talking about immigrants, and lots of Albanians are there, and I was in a way very curious to see if there was any Albanian in that.
I had in another class an Albanian girl, and you know, the Albanians girls, I had two in another class. They are very, very, you know, they speak very, very good Greek. Probably because they like to incorporate to the country. They speak in a way that you cannot understand that they're foreigners. Even their pronunciation is very good.
We have a talent for second languages, so lots of the Albanian can speak Greek or Italian so
fluently.
Yeah, so but thank you, Olga. I appreciate it, and good to meet you virtually. So
you're all trainees, by the way. We are all trainees.
So I'm not feeling alone. Thank you.
No, I would like to say that we decided to give Olga all this to share with you and with us her experience, because we were thinking, we were teaching that how important is to use symbolism, symbolization, and myths and tragedies and the Homeric epic are full of symbolism, and ask how we wanted to connect the myth of Adigon or the other myths, because they help us to connect our social unconscious, okay, with the conscious, with the everyday life. So that was, and it is really, as you said, Angela. It's really a very, very helpful tool if you want to use that, or to analyze the process, an analytic process, using these myths.
One thing I find is that in groups or with individual people I'm working with individually, depend on their knowledge of texts like this. I would find it difficult to bring into a group, but it helps me think about a group maybe if I've read something, and I may ask them, have you read this? Have you thought about reading it? But to bring it in as a narrative in the way you could with your teaching is a bit more difficult in an analytic group, but somebody might bring it in. But I was very struck by your presentation, Athena, and how I experienced the large group yesterday, the last large group, and thinking that that trauma that Olga was speaking about for those refugees, actually we're all in that to some greater or lesser extent at the moment in the large group.
Yes.
And how can we do that as a community of therapists, look at our own trauma that could help us ease the pressure on each other, because it seemed such a hideous place to be at the end for some people. It was clearly very traumatic. I was thinking about that split that you're talking about.
And aggressiveness that can happen, and aggressiveness that can happen.
When we're traumatized.
Well, this leads me to a question I wanted to ask you, Athena, about the pathological potential space that you talked about in your presentation, and also the sort of parasitic type of communication, and wondering if there is a way you could elaborate in terms of how you worked with that to change the group, to move it into a different kind of space. You know, I thought,
yeah, as we said, is the way that we analyze and have in mind how trauma can bring us a more pathological way of a pathological potential space, and how we can, in a small group, try to find out how the pathological potential space distracts the individual symbolization. When we find out that people start being aggressive to each other, don't be able to have this ruth, as I said, the concern of the other, as I said, in the small analytic group, I could see that during the economical crisis and even now. Then what can help, if this is the question, is to be able, from the part of the group as a whole and from the part of the therapist, of the conductor, of the therapist, to be able as much as to make a space, a more contained space. To this can be helped by letting people, putting them in a more kind of reverie and letting them talk and about narratives, connected the past with the present though. Narratives about the present critical situation that they are, crisis, or people, or if they had some in COVID, if they had people that they died or something, bring their narrative, but connected with the past, not disconnected with the past. So bringing narratives is something that for me would be help them and being more and more able to contain them. And the other thing that came up, especially during the economical crisis and during the nowadays pandemic, was how would be able as a therapist to show them that we are part of the crisis as also as therapists, but being able to survive. So as to show the therapist if is able to show that he's also has traumatic experiences, not talking about that, but for example, I bring the example that happens right now when we start making the online or Skype or Zoom meetings with our groups. It is, the people can also understand that the therapist has also problems working with that. It's not only them, but he can, but the therapist can survive, can accept, can contain them. So it's the work on containment, mostly.
Could I elaborate, please, to what you said? Because you said that there is a kind of reverie in the group, not just the talking, but the containment. And I want to add that one has the safety in the group to revisit, to process trauma. It is the safety of the members, the safety of the group as a setting that provides some, therapeutic help this process.
Yes, and if I want also to, if I can also to share something, in my group, in my class, I noticed that there were let's say, two wishes, which seems to be conflict, but in fact they were not. So from one side, everyone wants to find with the other members of the group common customs. To say, oh, we do it this way also in our country. And at the same time, to communicate something that would differentiate its student, giving them the chance to defend, let's say, a national identity that served to preserve the uniqueness of personal memory and personal myths. That's what was my experience. They like very much to talk about something that has to do like that we did yesterday. Yesterday here in the symposium, all of us try to say one song from our country, and I don't know if anyone participated on that yesterday. It was very nice. Everyone sang a song or from in his language, not translated, and we all feel gathered through this, you know, through this, through this. I don't know how. Through this procedure, yes, it was really very nice. And we didn't talk about that because also to sing a song is something that you do it using your unconscious part. It's something that comes from your deepest, let's say, pieces from inside. Talking about the myth, all countries has their myth. They have all countries have their fairy tales, and all these connected us with our childhood. So brings out and other things. I think this is that's how I have experienced that. I don't know if it's helpful, but that's my experience.
I felt quite hopeful that, thank you to all three of you. I felt that processing in groups is helpful, and I find myself having a real wish that in the large group we bring our myths. I think that might help us to get somewhere rather than our battles. It's not that our battles aren't real, but they get fought in a large group. I think myths help us think. So thank you.
I would also like to say something. I was moved very much, and it was not the first time that I heard the presentations, but now, and I thought that I'm moved, and I have been moved again today because I'm Greek and I know the myth. But seeing that you have been moved also, I believe that's the proof that there is something universal and social and conscious that touches every one of us. So we thank you for having us moved.
I think even if not being Greek, most of us here know the Greek myths, I think.
Yeah, we wouldn't be here, would we?
I think.
Or we want to know them.
So we have 3 minutes left.
I suppose it highlights for me about political correctness and how maybe political correctness flattens everything and homogenizes everything, including myths and stories. You know, that they've been talking in the UK about changing some of the stories from childhood so that difference is got rid of, instead of actually difference, as you were saying, Olga, helps us to see. And it's really important that those myths in all the different countries remain. I'm just thinking of, I keep going back to the Mahabharata, which I read years ago.
Yes.
Which is a huge mythical story that affected me very deeply when I was a teenager. And, you know, it's amazing.
Yes, and the more you read in all these myths, the more you find similarities between Mahabharata, between the ancient Greek myths, between the fairy tales from Scotland, from German, from everywhere. There are similarities. There are many similarities.
I wonder if there's something about a time and place that's really significant for this particular coming together of papers today, because it does feel as if, you know, with so much uncertainty and the kind of global strife everywhere, that this need to kind of reconnect with something which feels very fundamental and really core. It feels to me that's where I'm going to. I'm looking at stories again, I'm looking at myths again, and it feels there's something about grounding. Come on, let's get back of a feet back on the ground, and all of this virtue as a sort of alternative to the virtual headspace, you know, to the intellect, something different.
So I must finish.
And
Just thank you to
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Angeliki,
Thank you, Isara.
and all of you who have participated in the discussion, thinking about these important.
thank you also, Isaura, for being with us in this panel, and thank you all for coming to this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Nice to meet you.